Welcome to the Etsy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and this is your co-host, Dan Portnoy, producer of the Etsy Podcast. We are doing what I have been enjoying, a great fun series, marching back through Sacred Strides, the book, as opposed to Sacred Strides, the movie. Digging into themes and extras and bits and pieces that make the book worth reading, which you totally should. So we're going to dive into chapter 3 today. And hi, Dan. How you doing?
I'm all right. I was thinking of Sacred Strides, the experience.
Sacred Strides,
the movie.
The book, the movie, the experience.
The experience, yes. It's themed. I don't know what... There would have to be like some sort of small character that was our guide through...
I'm small, and I'm a character.
Maybe a robot, though. Oh. Maybe a robot.
Robot J.
Sure. All right, so today, I think... what's that?
He loved that idea, he said, which is why
I just loved it so fast, I ran right past it. Yep. I didn't hear you correctly. Speak louder next time in my other ear. Okay. It's Willy Wonka. So this is your Tale of Two Cities chapter. Easily, it was the worst of times. This is this is not a big sunshiny chapter.
It's not.
I think it's funny because I don't know. Like lately, this chapter is a lot about like limits and failing.
Yes,
really, and a thing that we all love to do and talk about
are limitations and the fact that everything ends.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Can't we just Instagram our whole lives forever?
Yeah. This was one of those chapters that I got, and I had a great editor. It's not like I had a great editor, but they were very concerned about some of like this is dark. I was like, I don't know if it's dark. It's just, this is when we say like, I'm just being real, bro.
Bro.
It does begin the chapter I'm looking at now says, I've been fired twice. It opens with being fired.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't, I have I been fired twice? Once.
Really?
Definitely once.
You've been fired one time?
Yeah. I was 32.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's deep.
Yeah.
That's deep in the game.
That was a big whoopsie.
Yikes.
Yeah.
You got, what's the guy's name? I just blanked on his name. It was going to be a really good football joke just now. Josh. He used to coach for the Patriots, and then he coached for the Raiders.
Oh, McDaniels.
You got Josh McDaniels. Because isn't he 32? I think he's like 32, 33.
Yeah, he probably is.
You got Josh McDaniels.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Portnoy. I don't know. What was that?
No, not Josh McDaniels. I know what that was about. That was a terrible decision. How did you get fired? What happened?
Well, it is, this is great because I really want to talk about this. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about.
I wrote mine in a book.
Yeah, but you made that choice. I'm making this choice now.
Okay, got it. Awesome.
You had time.
I forced
there was
you
an editor. There apparently was an experience.
This is why you're the producer. Is because the producer doesn't make this decision.
I just go, Yeah. No, I totally... I had some responsibilities and I did not meet them. And I did not know that I wasn't meeting them until that moment. And then it was like
really good.
And so, yeah,
yes,
it was one of my first gigs here in LA.
Oh,
so that was it's all been up since there, but
yes.
It was a pretty brutal one.
LA's a hell of a place to get fired too, man.
Yeah. I mean, I've done some firing here, which I actually did some firing here before I was fired, which I guess was great. But that didn't go well either. I was called names in that one, but and it was it was a little brutal. But we're still Facebook friends, so I count it as a win.
Yes. Either that or they haven't deactivated the account yet.
Yeah, they just probably hate Facebook and don't.
That's it. Anymore. No,
anyway,
my firings were, I try to make them comical. They weren't at the time. And that's the thing about retrospect, right? It's like, oh,
no, these are not comical at all.
These are not comical. I try to make them a little bit funny, but I got fired. I got fired. The way I said it is like, I've been fired twice, and both times it was from jobs that required me to supervise children.
I don't know why that makes it seem worse.
It does.
Like extra worse.
Worse
Yeah,
and
like,
funny.
Like you were a bricklayer and you were fired. And people are like, that's fine.
Yes.
I had to watch.
I was supposed to be
4th graders.
supervising kids,
Ooh.
and I did that so badly, they said go away.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I learned the point of the thing was I learned that I was leaning on talent instead of care. That ends up being the kind of the chapter theme. Is I did not care about the kids in front of me. I cared about being funny or clever or whatever. I didn't want to do a good job. I wanted to do the job like I don't know. I guess I'm not sure what the other side of that is. Like I didn't want to do a good job. I wasn't interested in doing a good job. I was interested in doing a job that made me feel clever and funny and whatever. It was not being full of care and cool. I think that's probably fair to say. I was trying to be cool.
Yeah,
one of the many reasons being cool is overrated.
I think this is a very big deal, like for anybody. I mean, myself included. Of like, hey, you're 20 and you're doing stuff, and you're like, yeah, I'm making my way in the world. But your opinion is like, well, first I have to be cool, and then all the other stuff is after it. But as long as I'm being cool, it's good. And so I do think this is interesting that what you say here is that's one of the tricky things about being identified as talented. Yes. Which is just like, it makes me think of those gifted and talented programs where like all of those kids now are like in rockin' middle management, like a champ.
Yeah.
Like those. Yeah. So that's,
and it was an odd bit of writing for me to do because I just sat with a group of leaders this morning and had this very conversation that there's it's not traditional humility, like coming to grips with one's limitations. I'll say it from my own perspective. Coming to grips with my own limitations, like it didn't come through the doorway of what I would have originally considered humility, where like, yeah, I'm limited, and like it actually came. It was like, no, there are ways in which like I'm really good at certain things, and because I'm good at these certain things, like I had to recognize that I was substituting my talents for care or like for attention, which like came with like, yeah, that actually happens to talented people or people who like put their talents out front all the time. That if you are good enough at something, you can get away with all kinds of shit that you probably shouldn't get away with because you're talented. And that's not just a systemic problem. That's like a personal cancer, and it will undo you over time. If you continue to lean on your talents instead of learn how to care for people, and this was the lesson I was learning. I not only will I continue to hurt and disappoint people, but I'll continue to be malformed as a person because I don't want to be who that kid was becoming. Like I would not have liked being who that kid was becoming, and I needed to learn the lesson of your talents are great, but if they're not contextualized by care, you're gonna really not like who you are long term.
Yeah, but I've never thought of it so much as like lean on my talents or care about people. I don't think I've ever heard it in those like dichotomy situation, like that duality. I don't, because it's like, well, if you lean on your talents or you lean on your usually when people talk about talent, usually the other side of the coin is work.
Yeah.
Right. It's not care, it's work. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna be talented. That's fine, but talent's only gonna get you so far.
So I think that, and I'm feeling more comfortable about saying this as I get ready to say it. I think work is a way we talk about the execution of care. In other words, like I work at it because I care about it and not because I'm talented. This is like the traditional thing that happens. It's the story about the kid who can dunk when he's 14 and hit like every 17-foot jump shot. Like he's just got the talent, but he doesn't care enough to do the work, right? And so the difference ends up being that work is an outpouring of care as opposed to like an outpouring of talent for me, and I think for a lot of folks who live with and in their talents, like talent can be just to be talented can be so blinding. that like I cannot put the work in. We all know that person who shows up and they haven't prepped. They haven't done the reading. But they get to the meeting and they're charming and they're articulate and they can do it in 3 minutes. And part of, if you're in the boardroom and you're watching this person pull it off last minute, you're like, there's one way where it's like, that's a marvel that she's that talented and that witty and she can pull it off right there. But like, gosh, the rest of us like worked our ass off for the last 3 months. And what we end up feeling is like, you don't really care. You can just show up and do it. That's cool, but you don't really care. Work, I think I'm comfortable saying this. Work is an expression of care rather than just like an outpouring of talent. So we're saying the same thing.
I think, but I think I didn't get tired of it as much until I was like mid-30s, and then you'd see somebody do it, and you'd be like, "This guy's winging it." Or you go to some conference and somebody's winging it. You can just tell because it's like, well, if you're talented in this certain way, whether it's speaking or whatever, but when you bump into somebody who's obviously winging it because you have that same kind of talent, and then it went from like, oh, that's interesting to like, oh, this is a disaster.
Yes.
Like I might be offended. I'm definitely like upset because obviously there isn't. Yeah, that I would definitely say that because I felt like when I've walked into, I don't know if it's sermons or that kind of thing, and it's winging it,
100%.
and then I'm like, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about any of this stuff. That's just it kills me.
Yeah, and in the long run,
makes me so upset.
And in the long run, that ends up being the thing I would suggest, and that's the point of the book. Is like, or the point of that book. It's the point of the chapter is, in the long run, becoming someone who cares contextualizes everything. It contextualizes both the work I put in, and it contextualizes my talents. Like, is it worth being talented if I don't care? I would suggest in the long run, I would have been a really I know cats like this. I would have been a really destructive force in a lot of the cultures that I care about. I would have been destructive because it would have been about the execution of my talent as opposed to the care of the culture. I would have been destructive, and I would not have liked me.
Yeah, I think you right here too often being talented can become a mask for all kinds of substantial deficiencies, including a lack of wisdom and care. I think that this plays out church-wise a lot because you see like the explosion happen, and then they go away for a couple of years, and then they say, "I'm back," and we're supposed.
They start a church in Arizona, maybe.
That is exactly what I was thinking. I
know it is.
That is exactly what I was thinking about.
He's a talented cat. He's a really talented cat.
No question.
No question, he's talented. That's like, we won't even. I don't have to name the name because that podcast got done real well. But homie's like a super super talented cat. He's got all the talents, and what folks like you and I feel, experience about his work is a lack of care.
Do you think it's a lack of care to everyone, or just because he obviously very much cares about a certain subset maybe of people? You don't think so?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know homie in his heart of hearts.
Right, of course not.
But I just can't imagine at this point in American church history and culture looking at the lay of land and thinking that, like, even for the folks who are willing to follow him, that this is the best way. That's just not care. That's not full of care. You're taking people down a road. First and foremost, I mean, just the form. I can talk church for days, but like that form of church is on the way out. You're not leading people in a direction of wisdom, health, and long term. And secondly, you're sucking people into your everything. Everything you do becomes about you. Everything you do becomes about you. And if you were caring about the people around you, it would be about them. You're not lifting your people up. Your folks are not the hero of their story. You are the hero of their story, and you've propped yourself up to be the hero of that story. That's exactly what talent does. Is it centers you at the victimization and the belittlement of the people around you, so that the only value there is that they're associated with how talented you are. That's what talent does. Care decentralizes you, and you get planted like a seed in the hearts, the minds, the lives, and the well-being of the people around you, and you kind of disappear. And all of your talents get contextualized in the well-being and the flourishing of other people's lives. Care it makes you smaller to the betterment of the people around you. Talent always puts you at the top, in the middle, and you become a thing. It's part of how I know, like, yeah, bro, you don't care. If you did, you would have disappeared. Mark. Let's just do it. We're gonna do it.
Well,
let's just do it.
So the other thing that you apparently were very good in your early 20s at is the game of tag. You're very good at it because we have freeze tag, hide and seek tag, play dead tag, regular tag as all things that you did with daycare kids. So, I, the funniest part to me is that, like, even what you did, I've heard stories that are way worse than this, of like, pile into my car and like things are going to get terrible, where like speeding and we cross state lines, and with kids, and
no, what I did was that it was 105 degrees. This is how I got fired the second time. Second time. The first time I was fired from a private school for bad words. This should come as a shock to no one. and everyone said no way. But the second time I got fired, it was 105 degrees, and I had a group of 9 kids, and I was responsible for an outdoor activity, and they were super not interested. I was not, and this is what I mean. It's like I wasn't even good at the job. Like I wasn't creative. I was like, what are we gonna do outside? And so I piled 9 kids into my hatchback, put the seats down. They all climbed in the hatchback, and we drove around the parking lot for an hour with the air conditioning on. They loved it. And they loved it so much they told their parents.
and their that's parents, where things went awry.
And that's when things went awry. It was so good. People spread the message, and then we found out. Put them in danger. That's what I did.
Yeah, but it is funny though, because I'm like, that's even not that much danger.
It's not.
I mean, it's really not. I mean, you stayed in a parking lot, like, I don't know. I feel like I've heard youth group stories that are far worse. Oh, yeah. Far worse.
Oh, totally. Yeah, but the public state system, or the state system, was not going to put up with that. They'd been sued plenty.
Yeah, no. Yes. If there's anything I know about organizations with children, it is about lawsuits. The CYA.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you got to make sure you're thinking about everything in terms of litigation. So I mean, I guess the question I would have for you was, like, you talk about these things in your early 20s. When was the moment that you were like, hey, this isn't working? Like, the talent isn't enough. Because usually it's after a very humbling, I mean, people don't come to this realization usually on their own. It's usually after like massive failure. Because it didn't work out. Like I just swung and I was winging it and it didn't work out. So what was it that actually, was there one thing? It's usually not just one thing. But
yeah, there were definitely a series of things. And this is probably fresh on the mind because I was sitting with church leaders this morning. But being a church pastor over the course of time is a place where I really started to love the people I was working with, and I knew and felt that they had been, a lot of them, either hurt by or scared by like a religious system, like the religious system that I was a part of. And I realized, like, I didn't want to be part of that. And the split here is that my talents got me the job because it's like the algorithm, right? The system, like the algorithm, It likes talent, it likes noise, it likes flash. So I boy, yeah, I'm getting in trouble for this one, but it's not like I was hired by the denomination because I was this deep, wise, loving, caring human. Like, I was a good speaker and I had an audience already, and like there was something about me that was like not quite on the level of celebrity pastor, because I've never been that cat, but like it wasn't because I was like, oh wow, this person knows how to disciple and lead and how to take people from from floundering to flourishing. Like, no, I was talented. So the system liked my talent, but then the people who were also part of the system that I was being paid by, I started to really love them, and I did not want to be another part of their injury story. And
Mm.
I wanted whatever the best of me was to add to their lives. So to some degree, I mean, there were definitely some failures along the way, but it was more that I kind of fell in love with human beings. Um, and that started to shake out. That started to shake out the webs in my brain that had me caught up in my fascination with my own abilities.
Now, do you think it is interesting, because it is funny that I've been there's a woman named Julie Royce. I don't know if are you familiar with her?
No, who's
She
that?
does this thing called the Royce Report, and it also it very much tracks like a lot of scandals church wise and
Okay.
stuff like that. It's very interesting. Or she speaks a lot of truth to power. I'll say that it's a whole lot of like, why are you doing this, and
Okay,
then
cool.
kind of
Well,
puts
let's
them on
make sure we drop
blast
that in the notes.
in a good way. But um, it is funny. She often talks about how the system does reward the big personalities, and as a former uh, uh, media church guy, like that was our church was actually kind of strange, because our lead pastor was an introvert, and did not, and that was very strange. And I think it saved a lot of hassle.
Yeah.
We had scandal for money reasons, which was a different ballgame. But um, which doesn't money doesn't require a big
No.
personality at all, just more a checkbook.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. But it is interesting that our whole situation, when I think about American church, is like rewarding that talent and pushing on talent, and not necessarily pushing on substance, and not really push. It's more like the flash of the
Yes.
the car, not
Yeah, and
really
we're
what's
not
under
quite
the
over
hood.
it yet. And I mean, and it's not. And I
No.
mean, it's easier for you and I to speak on church stuff because we've been around church systems for a long time, and that's a lot of my audience. I still coach a lot of pastors, and but systems in general tend to reward flash, um, and appearance, or the appearance of success or the appearance of power. But yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't. It gets played out. How should I say this? Systems in general will what they want is the system wants to support itself. Almost any system
Yeah.
is built to support itself. It's the Facebook algorithm. It's the Instagram algorithm. It's most systems are designed to feed themselves, and what they generally feed themselves on is more and more attention.
Hmm.
This is part of what we get. There's the book, another Johan Hari reference. Johan Hari's most recent book is called Stolen Attention, and part of what he exposes is that like these platforms, specifically social media platforms, they're designed to to take and hold your attention, and that's all they want. They just want your attention, and the only way not the only way, the most surefire way to get your attention is with some sort of flash. It's anger, it's lights, it's like, but it's not about your well-being. It's not trying to give you information. Well, most systems are built like social media platforms, and they're designed to keep and maintain your attention, and then your well-being is a secondary consideration. They want to be the thing that you're paying attention to, and then if you give them your attention, this is the dark part of the sales pitch. If you give them the system, the attention it wants, then it will reward you by taking care of you, potentially. It is a fully I mean, the kingdom is an upside down version of that. That like, I'm just going to care for you, and uh,
Hmm.
and if I do that, then in the long run, I will kind of disappear from your life. And those stories you hear of pastors, hearing about people's well-being long term, and they're saying things that they're passing on information or knowledge or wisdom that they got at some from some pastor, and she didn't even mean for this to become like a meme in this person's life, but now it's how they live their life. They don't even remember her name as a pastor, but that's how they're living. Like, that's kingdom level success, where it's like you just sowed good seed into someone else's life, it was blown off into the wind, planted itself somewhere else, and it grows outside of your control. That's that's kingdom growth. That's like more God-hearted growth. Systemic growth tends to look more like, if you give me your attention, I will reward you with some form of well-being. Care is the thing that splits those two things in half. If as a leader I actually care about you, I have to care less about the thing I'm building, um, or I will make you a pawn in it, and that's not care of your life.
Yeah. Well, can we back up just a second though? So we're talking about you're talented. You're being found in your 20s as having a talent, or maybe a newly discovered talent in your 30s. What are some steps that you can just? How do we move from like I've got this all figured out to I need to actually set aside some stuff because like
Yep.
and I'll just say very personally is like it was very interesting becoming an instant dad at 40
Yep.
um and dealing with a blended family and making sure that one of the big things was we wanted to make sure that all the kids were on board with the blended family
Yep.
happening because we there the idea of like oh well we can just do whatever we want was like not really a thing because like getting married because I felt like well if we lose a kid along the way that's not really
Yep.
that's actually the ball game so that doesn't matter
Yep.
so we did a lot of I guess careful planning
Yeah.
that way and involvement and that kind of thing. What are some what are some instant or not instant? I because I don't think it has to be. It's a growing process, but what are some ways that you find that you can make sure that you're caring even now in what you're doing instead of just paying lip service to
Sure.
something or going through the motions of something and have it actually yeah I mean
Yeah.
I keep hearing myself say in my brain they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care
Yep.
even though it's I feel like it's very trite but it is
It's
very
very
true
true.
uh
So make it
but
personal. So this is where I will push back against the grain of it doesn't matter what people think, and I'll do that over and over and over again. It does matter what other people think, and um, it just matters who your who is. So making a list, no matter what work you're doing, specifically in the creative arts or in church ministry kind of stuff, which is most of my audience, there are people who will receive what you're doing, and those people will, sorry to say it, they will just matter more than other people to you. They just matter more. And whether they flourish and are better off for what you do, it just matters more. I do this with artists all the time, specifically authors, when I'm talking about, what they're writing, and they're like, well, I don't know my audience. And I'm like, well, let's not try to figure that out by way of who you're going to sell this to. Like, let the machine do that later on. But right now, like, make a list of the people. If you sold 20 books, who, like, what names and faces do you want on the list of those 20? Like, if you just sold 20 books, like, who's on that list that makes you feel like that was enough? Identifying the particular people that your soul is actually attached to as you do the work. Do that now, because in the reality, I'm probably pushing a little bit beyond my expertise here in terms of psychology, but I really do think that's the way the soul works. I think the whole deathbed scene in terms of like who's standing around saying thank you, like when you're passing, like I think that matters to the soul, like on the daily, like when you're doing what you're doing, like who do you really want to say good job at the end of the day? So knowing that you probably have a short list of people somewhere in the substrata of your conscience, of your conscious, and somewhere in the top part of your soul, and naming those folks and knowing like I want these people to feel cared for. That's a really great practice. It's a great practice for the beginning of a project, but it's also a great white balance project when we feel lost. Like who do you want this to matter for? Um, that's a practice for now. Early in life, detaching ourselves uh, from other kinds of success. This is why rest as a practice matters. It's pulling days off the calendar to detach yourself from systems that will teach you things that aren't true about the value of your work. You got to do it regularly because you're being poorly trained. Even if you're going to seminary, even if you're going to a great art college, you are being trained by systems around you that are, I would just say it, just flat out wrong about human value. And if you don't learn to detach yourself from those systems on the regular, you'll just believe them and work out of that system of value. So early on, learning to practice rest, taking those days off every week, monthly, etc. But then in the long run, who is your soul working for? And naming those people.
Okay. You close out the book after we learn two terrible two fun stories of the lack of care, maybe of the job and of the kids, of then kind of it gets really personal in terms of what you're going to do with having Asa on a camping trip,
Mm-hmm.
and then him putting him in care of someone else,
Yes.
and then which is really funny because I think of like your bosses early on. Oh yeah, well Justin's going to care about those kids. Justin's going to care, and understand. Like, sure, that's going to be the same thing. A thing
Mm-hmm.
that you said here about Darren, that he's definitely cares about. He's going to care about Asa, and you weren't worried about that, but you knew that's a little different depth than the guy who shows up at your improv night and goes, "You'll be great with kids."
Yeah.
Which you just have to start wondering where his
He had some bad
choice.
metrics going in. He valued
Yeah,
my
some
talent as well.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The story at the end of the chapter is that I was on a camping trip with my son with some neighbors who've been friends for a long time, and I had to leave a day early to go to a work thing. And Asa asked if he could stay, and I was like, "Well, no. I mean, we're going like because like I'm there with him. If I leave, like, who's going to care for him is the actual question. You don't leave your son in the woods by a lake." And then he said, "Well, no, Darren said I could stay with him." No, Darren's a guy I've known for I don't even know how many years now, and I know because of his track record, I know that Darren cares about my son, and so I knew that I could trust Darren to take care of Asa if I wasn't around. So I got to go on this work trip, and then and Asa stayed with Darren and had a great time. I trusted Darren to care for Asa, even though it meant like adding another kid because he's got four. I added a fifth to his brood. I knew what I said is like um, I said to Asa, Asa said, Darren said that I could stay with him, and that settled it for me. See, Darren is a great dad and a good friend. He's funny and he's clever and he's as creative a father as I've ever met. And all those things are true. He's like a really funny guy. He's great to have at a party. Then I said this though, but it wasn't Darren's humor or talents that mattered to me in that moment. It was that he cared about my son, and I knew he did. So Asa stayed for an extra day and night, and he jumped off rocks and went mountain biking and built a fire and ate way too many marshmallows. It wasn't Darren. Like what I valued about Darren in relationship to my kid wasn't that he was funny. Like, do I want my kid to be entertained and have a good time? Sure. It wasn't. It was clever. It was like, do I want my kid on adventures? Great, absolutely. And like that was me as the as the teacher at the private school, and it was me as the daycare guy. I was like, I'm talented and I'm creative and I'm clever. But the thing that let me feel comfortable leaving my son with Darren is like I've seen him care for Asa. Like I know he does. I know that if Darren has to make the choice between being funny and clever or being like the hard ass and like telling him no, he can't have a 14th marshmallow, then I think he had 17. But like if Darren has to make a choice and sacrifice like his coolness in order to keep Asa safe and make him well, then he'll do that. That was the ball game. Early in the chapter, that kid, the Justin at the early chapter, like I was not willing to sacrifice my talents or my humor or my cleverness for care. Had I been, it would have been really clear. Like, don't put 9 kids in a freaking car. You don't know what's going to happen. That's just dumb. It's funny, but it's also like that's really dumb. And every parent knew it when they heard the story. With my own kid, I knew that Darren's all these wonderful, talented things, but I knew that he cared about him, and that contextualized his humor and his adventurous spirit. Like go on the adventure and have a great time with this person who cares for you.
Yeah. Now, what is it about kind of sacrificing your talent for the care, in I guess in not in search of the care, in service
Yes.
to the care. Um, it doesn't mean that you take the talent and you throw it all away
No.
either, because
Nope.
that's part of the thing,
It's part of
right?
the thing.
Of either position or that kind of thing. How do you balance it?
You don't. You just can. It's recontextualized. I mean, I was just watching a documentary about greatness in basketball, and Doc Rivers is one of the guys giving that gets interviewed, and he talks about LeBron and Jordan, and talks the conversation about who's the greatest, and it's always a fun conversation that will never be resolved, and I hope it never is. But like, what was Jordan great? Was LeBron great? And part of what he talks about is that they were able in time, both of them, that like if you play with those guys, everyone's numbers come up. Like everyone looks like a better player. The part of how they're great players is that their talent makes the folks around them, their abilities makes the folks around them better. Now that's one of those like cheeseball sports analogies. Sorry, unfortunate. They're so great. But it's not that they're not talented. They're like the most talented guys to ever play basketball. It's one of those two is the greatest. That and the folks around them flourishing, they contextualize their talent in the overall win. It was about the Bulls. It was about the Cavaliers. It's about the Lakers. The folks around them get better. It's never about being less talented. It's never about being more talented. It's never about like hiding your talents. There's a whole thing in the Bible about not doing that. It's about knowing where to invest them, and to constantly reinvest my talents in the building of my ego, in the building of like my supremacy, in the building of like my brand. Like that's the bad story. The good story is me investing my talents in the flourishing and the wholeness and the happiness of the people I get to be with and work with.
Great. It is just really funny because like I think my pause in all of this is just like, I don't know. I guess I don't think of in my 40s. I don't think about the talent much anymore, actually, at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't think about. I just don't think about. I just think about like, no, this is the thing I like to do. So
Yeah.
I'm doing that because I like to do it, not because I'm really talented at it now. Because
Yes.
I mean, although if I could start dunking tomorrow, I might change careers a little bit. But I don't think so.
No.
But just like. I don't know. It's just an interesting scenario. Just thinking about. I was talking with my wife this week. We were talking about pastors that wound and how that it's 100% normal. And I mean, just like think about your favorite pastor. And I just thought about mine, and then I thought about what he was like 30 years ago, and I was like, oh, I didn't know him then, but I mean, I've seen him grow even in the 10 years, almost 15 years that I've known him, and the difference in him in that way. And I just think about like what, people leave the church, people get offended, people, and we were just kind of recounting some of our people we've bumped into, and I've really had some, I mean, in the same space of course they hurt people in their 20s, of course they did, and whether it was intentional or not, but of course they did. But the idea being like, well, I hope my a pastor in their 40s or 50s or 60s is much better than they were in their 30s, and they didn't have it completely figured out. I just don't even know how you would have that, especially if you meet any seminarian. They know everything already.
Yes, they do.
Right then, and that's
talented,
that was always
informed,
the funniest.
equipped.
Right.
But it takes relationship and failure over time to teach you to care. And we come back to this. We come back to this over and over with this with this series. Is like, man, I hate it too, like everyone else. But there are balls you just have to drop doing things that matter in order for you to learn the things that are necessary in order to become whole. There aren't other pathways. You can't learn it in a classroom. You can't get it in your head. You've got to do something that matters and something you care about. You've got to drop the ball, and then you have to process that stuff out and figure out and follow the thread. And one of the threads you follow back is like, I'm doing this because I can, and not because I care. I can teach it. I can say that out loud. And if I said that to me when I was 24 years old, I wouldn't believe me. I would think that's a really neat thing to say, and then I'd be like, I care, because I wouldn't know what it felt like to actually care, because I hadn't
Right.
dropped the damn ball yet. So
Right.
pastors who hurt, like, yeah, man, like it's in every facet of life in which we're caring for people and or ourselves. It's just such a tough lesson, but you've got to do things that matter for people you care about, and then drop the ball, and then process that stuff out. That's the only pathway to learning things like how to care about yourself or other people. That's it. There's no other way.
Yeah. It is. It just is something when I think about just that wounded, that at the failing, and then tracing the steps back, and like, which is a little different than, like that awkward thing that right before I go to sleep, that remembering that awkward thing I did in fourth grade, but thinking through the like how I hurt somebody, and actually having to come to grips with like, oh, but it doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter whether I see the hurt or feel the hurt, because I think I was probably 30 some years old before that figured out of like,
Yep.
it doesn't really matter if I think what has happened is worth hurting them or not. They are hurt.
Yep.
And that actually is the part that matters. And it doesn't matter
That's
my
the part
opinion
that
on
matters.
this. And that was a real hard one.
Yes.
And because honestly, I think in that conversation, I can still remember I was having a conversation with my friend Amy, and she went around the mulberry bush with me like 4 times. She was like, "It doesn't matter what you think," and I was like, "But that is just silly. That is a silly thing for them to be offended about. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter." And she just like, and I was like, and it finally, I think honestly, it was a weird week, because I just was wrestling that with the whole week of just the other. I mean, and
Yes.
that's the thing that we talk a lot about, is like, well, it doesn't matter because that's the other, and isn't the other's what we're supposed to worry about,
Yes,
much
it is.
more than the self. But not that the self, and so I think it's interesting, because it's not like you can take the self and just throw it away, because, and that doesn't work either, that martyrdom thing, like, oh, because eventually you're just going to super fail then, and you're going to let everybody down, and then you're not going to feel good either, so that's going to be terrible. Yeah, I don't really know what, like, I feel like I should be asking questions like, okay, so how do we in our 20s make sure that we care? How do we do the least amount of damage as we grow older? How do we, show the care not only in the work that we're making, but also, and I don't know if these are all kind of trite, but because some of them I don't even think if that's possible, but yeah, where do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're coming to the book at all, it's likely that there's a piece of your story that has to do with wanting to learn. There's something about you that wants to learn this. That one of the ways we find ourselves detached from our own work and from our own lives is not one of the ways. One of the indicators that we are detached from our own work and our own lives is that we feel detached from care. We feel like we're not caring for people. It's what your heart wants. It's what your soul wants. It's what the spirit in you wants for the world around you when you set out to do any sort of work, much less like really true great works, much less truly great works that are rooted in your soul, that you're best at and most talented at. What your heart and your soul, your body wants is to care for people with the best of who you are. It is the best place to plant those seeds. The seeds of who you are, the seeds of your future, the seeds of your ideas, the best of your talents. The best place to plant all that stuff is in a caring relationship with the people whose lives actually matter to you. And so part of why we know when we are burning out is that we don't feel like we're caring for the world around us. And so following the thread back from like, why am I not happy? If I'm achieving maybe, or I'm not achieving, like if you follow the thread back from the disappointments many of us experience long-term in our careers, we can follow that thread back to something like I was recommending earlier to artists and authors, is like, for whom do you want your life to matter? For who? Give me a list, and let's make what you do about those people. Make it about caring for the people you can care for. And if we can lock in your efforts, your time, your talent around caring for the people that you can care for, that you want to care for, I promise you everything else follows that.
Great. Well, I think it's a good place to stop.
Amen and amen.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the At-Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is Dan Portnoy, the producer of the At-Sea Podcast. We've been talking about Sacred Strides. It's a pretty good book. Wrote it? I know. I also read it. And so if you're more of like, I don't have time to read, you do have time to listen. And it's like this podcast. It's just more me. So if you go to heartsandmindsbooks.com, my friend Byron runs that bookstore in Dallastown, Pennsylvania. It's my favorite independent bookseller in the country. Buying from him is a really good idea. And if you are a click and get it kind of guy, the book is right now on sale for some percentage off, I'm sure, at Amazon.com. Please go pick up the book. Until next time, Dan and I will be back for chapter 4 soon. Bye.